Hi dear students, as you know that we have started a series on history of English literature and this is the next video in the same series. Dear students, today we are going to talk about the previous topic which we have started, that is 18th century literature. And in 18th century literature today we have a new poet. So watch the complete video and understand what is 18th century literature and what are the poets in this 18th century literature. So let's begin. Here dear students, #39 history of English literature, 18th century literature. And in 18th century literature we are talking about minor poets of the revival, because dear students, we have already talked about so many major and important poets and other writers from the same age. Now let's talk about the minor poets of the age of revival. Now in 18th century we find that the seeds of romantic poetry is sown and hence these poets become very important. And here we have James Thomson, and we'll talk about James Thomson, and his lifespan was 1700 to 1748. Very first, let's talk about his life. Now talking about his life, he was born in Ednam, Roxburghshire, Scotland in 1700, and he was the fourth child among 9 children of Thomas and Beatrix Thomson. His father was the Presbyterian minister and minister of South Dean. So dear students, you can understand that he belonged to a well-to-do family. He was not so poor and he could afford so many things because his father was a Presbyterian minister, or later he became the minister of South Dean. Means he was the in charge of a estate, or we can say that of a village, or we can say that of a area or region, and hence we find that his family was among a very good people in those days. Dear students, he studied at College of Edinburgh. Later it became the Edinburgh University. So his alma mater was Edinburgh University or University of Edinburgh, and there he studied different types of subjects. For example, there he studied metaphysics, logic, ethics, Greek, Latin, etc. But he abandoned doing the degree, and just he wanted to become the minister like his father. Now dear students, here we have a statement by Robert Shields on Thomson. Let me clear one thing, that we find Dr. Johnson wrote lives of poets, and there he covered 52 poets, and we have a very important information about different types of poets by Dr. Johnson. In the same way, we have some information regarding James Thomson in Lives of Poets, and at the time we find that here Robert Shields is the earliest biographer of James Thomson. I quote, "Far from appearing to possess a sprightly genius, Thomson was considered by his schoolmaster and those which directed his education as being really without a common share of parts." I unquote. Now you can understand that he was not a very genius student, but still he could write a very beautiful poetry and very intellectual kind of poetry, and based on his poetry we find the new poems, the new genres in poetry began, and this credit must be given to such minor poets like James Thomson, because we find in the Thomson's poetry that how the romantic elements are included. Because next we will going to talk about his very important poem Rule Britannia and how it has become the national song. So now consider his major works. He is recognized only for 3 works right now. Very first, here we have Rule Britannia, published in 1740. Now it has become a patriotic song, as I already told you that this poem is composed in 6 stanzas and each stanza contains 6 lines. Next we have the Castle of Indolence, published in 1748, and it is a poem in Spenserian stanza, where you find Spenserian imagery in this poem. Now what is Spenserian stanza? Spenserian stanza is nothing but a stanza of 9 lines in which first 8 lines are written in iambic pentameter, and the last, means 9th line, is composed in 6 iambic feet, means it is an Alexandrine. So the last line is in Alexandrine. So this is the stanza form of James Thomson's poetry. So he followed or he practiced this Spenserian stanza, and we find a lot of Spenserian imagery or symbolism in his poetry. We called the Castle of Indolence. The third, his famous work is The Seasons. It is composed during 1726 to 1730, and it is a series of 4 poems including winter, summer, spring and autumn. Now all these are the seasons, and the very apt title we find seasons, and he talks about these 4 seasons. And these poems also are very beautiful poems, and still we afford to read these poems in a very leisure manner, and these are very beautiful poems in English literature. Dear students, let's understand some of the stanzas from his famous poems. Very first we have here Rule Britannia, and I quote, this is the very first stanza. When Britain first at heaven's command arose from out the azure main, this was the charter of the land, and guardian angels sang this strain. Rule Britannia, rule the waves, Britons never will be slaves. Now, this is a very important stanza of his poem called Rule Britannia. Now, if you look at the history of Britain, you find that the Britain or England or the British people ruled all over world because they got inspiration from such type of poets, and these poets have inspired them, and they already have written that the Britons will never be slaves. And in this way they find an inspiration or motivation in this poem, and hence still we find this is one of the national songs of England or Britain, still recited by people there. Next we have the Castle of Indolence, and here you see the picture of this Castle of Indolence or the drawing of the Castle of Indolence. I quote the lines: a pleasing land of drossy head it was, of dreams that wave before the half-shut eye, and of gay castles in the clouds that pass forever flushing round a summer sky. Here also poet boasts of England, the land of England, the British people, and just he praises the English people in this stanza. And again this stanza becomes for English people an inspiration, a motivation, and they work in that direction. Pleasing land of drossy head it was, and it was a very pleasing land of dreams that wave before the half shut eye. And this is the dream when a person sleeps in bed and his half eye open in the morning, and this is the morning dream, the glory of England. Everything he is explaining in this stanza, and hence he calls it as the Castle of Indolence. And here we have a picture of that Castle of Indolence. This is the drawing, imaginary drawing of the Castle of Indolence. So these are very important poems or famous poems of James Thomson. Now dear students, these 2 poems, one is The Seasons and the Castle of Indolence, are very significant because they paved the way for the coming poetry, and they gave different types of elements in the poetry, and based on these elements we find that romantic poetry developed, or the romantic atmosphere developed in the England. And how these 2 poems are important, let's see. And through this we can understand the place of James Thomson in the whole history of English literature. Here I have a quote from William J. Long. The Castle of Indolence and the Seasons, I quote, were significant of the early romantic revival in 3 ways. They abandoned the prevailing heroic couplet. They went back to the Elizabethans, instead to Pope, for their models, and they called attention to the long neglected life of nature as a subject for poetry. Now these 3 things are important in the poetry, because based on these 3 things we find romantic poetry developed. For example, the subject matter of romantic poetry is nature, or nature is very evident in the romantic poetry, which we are going to discuss in the next videos or in the next age. Now this is the place of James Thomson in the whole history of English literature. I hope you understand James Thomson. If you have any problem, any query, you can direct comment below in the comment section. I will answer to your query. So thank you very much for watching the complete video. Please like this video, share this video among your friends, and subscribe to Literature Simply. Stay tuned. Let's meet in the next video.